Welcome to Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast, a podcast for woodworkers and the maker community in general. With Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, Bryan Cush from Sawdust Bureau, and Robin Lewis from RobinLewisMakes. Hi everyone, I hope you're all good. This is episode number 11 of Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast. As always, I'm joined by my two co-hosts. In the left corner, we have Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks. Joey, how are you doing today?
Good, guys. How are you going?
And on the right-hand side of my screen, I can see Bryan, all the way from Melbourne. Bryan, how are you doing today?
G'day, guys. I'm really good. Thank you.
Good. And my name is Robin Lewis. Welcome everyone to the show. This is going to be a good one, I think. I'm quite excited about it. So, my next project that I'm going to be building is a workbench, and today I just wanted to have a chat to you guys about workbenches. I've never built a proper woodworking workbench, and I've gone through a couple of videos. I love that chunky style, that real heavy top, but when it comes to the timber that you're going to make it out of, the accessories, all of that, I'm pretty new to all of that. So I'm just really interested to hear what you guys have to say. The first thing that I'm a little bit unsure about is the material. Everyone seems to use pine. Joey, I watched your video. I know that you've used pine on your bench. Would you use pine again if you built a bench like that again?
I wouldn't use pine for the top again, and I only used pine because it was budgetary. I would probably use beech, something really hard. I know I can get that and it's cheap as chips compared to any other hardwoods.
And beech is harder than pine?
Yeah, beech is crazy hard. It's what they use for making tool handles and plane bodies and things like that.
Right, okay.
Only because I get annoyed with little dings and dents happening so easily on the work surface. Now it's a workbench, granted, but I don't want, I can see my top surface wearing out, after years. It would be nicer to not have to worry about slipping with a hammer and putting a big crown mark in it, whereas it's not going to happen with a hardwood top. The rest of it can be any old rubbish as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't really matter. But I was going to say, maybe Bryan, you could discuss as well, how do you use your benches that you have, and would you do you think you need a big, super traditional workbench? Robin, is that what you're going for as well? Are you going for something in the style, something that I built? Lots of vices and all that kind of guff.
Well, Bryan, before we get to you, this is the plan, so maybe you can tell me if I'm going down the wrong track. I was only looking at 600 wide, or 600 deep, that's it, and anywhere between 900 and 1200 wide, so a fairly small bench.
Right.
Yeah, my approach to workbenches is pretty utilitarian, to be honest. I batter them, I drop glue on them, I drop finish on them. I don't want something that's absolutely beautiful, and if it were me, I would probably go for something a little bit wider. I'll talk you through what I've got in the workshop. So I've sort of got a couple of assembly tables, which are just old second-hand desks with a leather top that are relatively flat, and they're sort of good enough, and I can do whatever I want with them. I've got a workbench that I built, which was the first thing I ever built with minimal tools. I think I had a jigsaw, a drill, and that was probably about it. And it was just a laminated pine door panel purchased from Bunnings on I think it's pine. Yeah, I think it's a pine frame, but they're pretty substantial legs on it, so it's got a good bit of weight down low, which is really important with a workbench, because the other one that I've got that I purchased from a tool or a tool stockist that I won't name the brand, but it's quite a heavy top on a light steel frame, super thin telescopic legs. Yeah. If you wiggle the bench, it moves.
Yeah, it's not good.
So it's pretty rubbish. It's got a couple of vices on it, but to be honest, the one that I use the most is a slightly higher Oregon workbench.
Right.
It stayed nice and flat at the top. If I was going to make another one, which I have been intending on doing for a while, I don't know, you've seen my workbench trolley on train tracks?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had welded up a steel frame for the top of that, and it's just got I think at the minute it's plywood, but it's usually got a vinyl sort of top on it that I can do glue ups on. I find that the steel frame stays way flatter, especially in my workshop, where the temperature variance will go from below freezing in winter to almost 50 degrees in summer. I reckon that any laminated top, no matter what timber you're using, is gonna bow. So you either need a substantial frame and clips that keep everything flat. If it were me, I would do a steel frame, probably about 25 to 30 mil steel frame, and maybe either an MDF if you're trying to do a cheap top. I would put dog holes into it. I would inlay T-tracks into it so you can use it for assembly. You can clamp things down to it. If you wanted to go a little bit more premium, maybe like a bamboo plywood is a really nice flat finish. It's super hard. Like I'm completely with you, Joey. Dropping a hammer or dropping a tool and putting a dent in a workbench is incredibly frustrating. But yeah, I reckon something like bamboo plywood, or if you want to go down a cheaper route, MDF with a wax finish on it. You drop glue on it, it comes off. That's what I would do personally. And then every year, maybe you just have to replace your MDF top. You can either sort of go the Festool MFT table sort of layout, where there's multiple doggles on it, and you can clamp a track to it, so you can use your track saw to get square cuts. But there's a really good, I think they're based in Finland, and they have this templating jig that allows you to create I think they're called Taiga, Taiga.
And you can just drill with a hand drill, is that right? To make your own...
they use a router, but it's got a bushing that's supplied, and you just sort of drop the router in and then step the jig along and route again. And that's a really nice way of creating something in-house as opposed to having to outsource it to a CNC. It's something that you could do in a home workshop. But for me, I just don't really want to spend my time making a beautiful workbench. That's just me. I know there's other furniture makers out there that, it is a real art form, and they get a beautiful HNT Gordon Weiss on it. And
so I wanted all that because I didn't have anything with a good vise on it. And I said, well, if I'm going to build myself a big, heavy bench, which is what you want, that's not going to rack around and I can throw my weight into planing on it, I'll make myself a heavy bench, and I might as well go and put some good vices on it while I'm at it. Now, that's not my everyday workbench. That's my woodworking quote-unquote bench. I made a torsion box top that's a full sheet of plywood size, and that gets abused. I mean, that's I'd say 80% of my work is made on just a flat torsion box that I can do whatever I need to do on it, and I can turn around, and my good bench is set up. I can throw something in a clamp, cut something, do what I need to do. But 9 times out of 10, I'm working over on the kind of assembly table, I guess what it is. The downside to how I've made it is it's got a very light base. It's just a couple of pieces of plywood as legs. And so it does move around when I'm really throwing my weight into it, which is not ideal. And I guess the question goes to you, Robin, like, what do you want to do with your bench? Do you want it to be an assembly table as well? Or do you want it to be kind of somewhere where you can put all your finer tools, and then you know that you've got a little spot where you can go put something in the vise, you can cut your finer joinery, and then you can take it to your other assembly area? Or do you want it to be all encapsulating coolness?
I think I'm pretty much in a similar boat to what you've just explained, where I've got 2 benches. One of them is a 1.8 meter by 900 assembly table on wheels, which I do most of my work on. The problem is, because it's on wheels, I get the feeling that you shouldn't be using that for chiseling. I mean, it works okay, but you're always going to have that bit of a flex where you really, you don't want the wheels, which are slightly, there's always a bit of movement in them, and you also don't have that solid connection from sort of the tip of your chisel through to the ground. So it's really going to be just for doing hand tool work, and that's kind of why I was thinking of going so small, so that it doesn't have a huge footprint in the shop, because I'm only using it every now and then. Now, obviously if I'm trying to hand plane a 2.4 meter long board, maybe I am shooting myself in the foot. But that's why I thought around that 1 meter, 1.2 meter mark, and with some good clamping pressure, 2.4, maybe even 3 meters, you should be able to get away with without any real hassle.
I can put a 3 meter board in my twin screw vise and extend it out 1.5 meters each way, and I can run a plane along it just fine. It's not going anywhere.
Right, so it's got they do have that much grip.
Absolutely. Any good vise should. The question then becomes, if you start pressing too far away from the center of the bench, are you going to start lifting the other end up because you've got this giant cantilever, and it's just a matter of throwing some extra weights on the bottom of your bench, I suppose, or bolting it down.
Yeah, I've got into the habit of storing all of my render, my big paint tins, any mortar in bags. That all sits in the bench that I'm using at the moment. Yeah, right. It all sits on that shelf, so it's crazy heavy. So go for it.
Sorry, my only complaint with my bench is that I would much rather have made it an extra meter longer.
Yeah.
Because I put this awesome tail vise on the top of my bench, but the longest I can get in there is maybe 2.1 because of the way the dog holes are and how much throw there is on the vise. So if I'm doing hand tool work only, and I'm trying to plane a big long piece, or especially when I was using the molding planes a lot, I don't have the length to actually work on what I want. But for the few times I want that, it would be a pain in the ass to have such a giant bench, and it would have made construction so much more expensive because of the lengths of timbers and getting multiples out of it. I would have had terrible offcuts, and it would have been pretty unaffordable. So there's this giant way up between practicality and wants.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. If it were me, I would go slightly longer than 1200 if you can afford it. Even if it's sort of 14 or 1500, just that extra 200 mil to have space to put tools on or whatever. I would just find that you'd be pretty limited by 1200.
Yeah, and I've got the space in the shop, so I can take advantage of that space. But because I've got a lot of tools on wheels, which I move around the shop when I need to use them, so they sort of sit against the wall and come out, any extra footprint that isn't mobile is now basically just a traffic hazard for everything else to move around.
I would maybe build the top big and deal with it and see how it fits in your shop, and then if you want to trim that extra 300 mil off, you can do that, as opposed to doing it the other way around. Just make sure your legs are sort of inset far enough to take a smaller bench.
That's a really good idea, actually. Just have a nice 200 mil overhang on either side, and then
that's kind of what I've got on all my benches anyway.
I think that's the key to any bench, is having like on my assembly table, I've got on the ends I've got like 600 mil overhang, and around the sides I've got almost the whole sheet overhang, and you need to be able to clamp the whole way around the table, I think. And because all the time you might be clamping multiple pieces up on an assembly table, so you can use a jig or something and walk your way around multiple pieces that are clamped around the edge of your table, and you might have a kind of an assembly line type thing as you go work your way from point to point around your table. Sometimes that happens as well, and you just want to be able to fix it wherever you need it, and the easiest option is just an F clamp and clamp it straight to the table.
So Joey, when you flattened your top, was it quite a process to do that, and have you done that again?
No, I haven't touched it because my tabletop can't twist because it's stuck in sliding dovetails, which even if I say so myself, I think it was genius, because I don't have to touch it. It probably has moved, I'm sure it's moved, but it's nothing that, like, a workbench does not need to be laser flat. So even if you're doing fine joinery, I don't believe it has to be laser flat. It needs to be within cooey, is about as flat as your piece of timber is, which is undoubtedly not dead flat either.
So I've been looking at doing the top like you see everyone do on YouTube, where it's the pine laminated, because it just looks so cool. It looks amazing. but I don't want to go that pine route. I want to look for something else. So I want to try and find something a little bit harder, as you've said.
I was going to ask you, what have you got that you think you might be using that's available to you?
So up the road at the timber yard, they've got something called Cooktown Ironwood. Brian, have you heard about it?
Sounds hard.
Sounds hard. Yeah.
Not only that, apparently it kills animals if they eat the foliage off it. So a lot of people have respiratory reactions to it when they're cutting it. So it might be a lot of fun. So I might go for something like that. But what I can't wrap my head around is the way the guys mortise legs into that top. Yeah. Now I get it. They're aligning the grain so that the expansion is up and down instead of left and right. But surely that width is going to want to move lengthways or widthways.
Well, I think what you find most of the time on those benches, it's in the split top Roubeau style, and so that you have a gap between your two your bench tops. You might have two like 300 mil wide planks that are your bench top with like a 50 mil gap, and I think the way I haven't actually built one of these. I can't think off the top of my head, but I believe that it's like two separate kind of structures, and so they're not going to move enough independently to start forcing the legs apart, which are joined down at the bottom.
Yeah, they do make them though solid tops. Jay Bates has one, and he's I've seen a lot of people do it similar to that.
Okay.
And it's just a solid top with those those really tight mortises going through.
Well, if it's quarter sawn timber and it's on its edge. Sorry, if it's quarter sawn, if it's on its edge, so you need flat sawn timber and put it on its edge. In theory, it's not going to move all that much, but I don't know. I haven't thought about making a bench in that way, so I need to give it some thought.
Yeah, because maybe then that split top is the way to go, because then it's just not even an issue. And as you say, because you don't need a flat surface, then...
Yeah. I hate the idea of a split top. Like, to me, it's like the worst thing ever invented. Like, why do you want to put a hole in your bench top? The first thing that you're going to do is lose everything that can fit down it. Like, I would just constantly be losing everything. I'm just not that way inclined to be gentle enough with my tools to like make sure they don't go down the hole in the middle of my bench top. Like, every chisel would be down there.
Yeah, that's another thing you can look at is putting in the tool well.
Yeah.
Which some people seem to think is all that.
I reckon it's a really easy way to get your tools covered in glue and dust and muck.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. I think the thing most people want out of anything, you talk to any woodworker or maker for that matter, they just want somewhere to work that's nice and flat and there's nothing else around.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start putting weird details in your work surface, it limits how much space you've got straight away.
Even putting drawers in, you then can't clamp to that side of your workbench because you're clamping on drawer rather than table. So I would go as much utilitarian sort of go that way as possible.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think you need to go for something like decent, solid, like 60, 70, 100 mil thick. Something that is not going to flex and give yourself a good kind of grounding. But what that is, I don't know.
I actually looked at mobile decking just because I've worked with that in the past. It's really easy to work with. It's pretty stable. But they cut it so that it's so the grain is the wrong orientation. So as soon as you flip it on your side, you're now you've now
so
got
it's quarter sawn already, is it?
A lot of the stuff seems to be. It might not all be. It's just a couple of boards that I've looked at, but a lot of it is. And I guess that would make sense from a decking perspective because you'd want it quarter sawn. Yeah. And so I might look at that just because I think that'd be a pretty interesting looking bench, and because that mobile quilla is so dense, hopefully it'll be a nice surface to work on.
What you could go down is a plywood road and laminate up a solid plywood bench, and then on the front face you could laminate on some hardwood because the plywood's not going to take abuse, especially if you're going to put a vise on it. You can have a nice hardwood kind of front cheek, takes all the abuse and you work on, and then you have like a edge grain laminated plywood solid block.
That's interesting.
And that would be quite, well, I imagine it would be more affordable.
Yeah, I could look at that actually. It's not a bad idea. And in terms of hardware, Bryan, are you particular with, like, do you use one of your vices more than the other?
Nope. I just got a couple of. I've got an old. Is it Irwin? Oh, no, I can't remember what it was. It's like a 1940s vice I bought off eBay for about $25. No, like I said, I'm not precious with, like, a vice to me is just something to clamp onto. Like, it doesn't really bother me if it's.
Do you have the leg vice and the face vice and the tail vice?
Nope.
Just the bog standard face vice.
Yep.
You can make a leg vice very easily as well. Like, they're so simple. The idea of a leg vice, my first one, I just cut up an old sash cramp and used the mechanism from a sash cramp, and then I just put a pin at the bottom, and that was my leg vice. And I used it in my first workshop probably for 2 years. So
and the leg versus the face, I think it's called a face vice is the right term. The difference between the two, I mean, is do you prefer the one over the other?
To be honest, I didn't see all the fuss around a leg vice. Like, after I made it, I was like, yeah, it does the job. It's very simple to make. There's a lot of fussing around where you can just buy like an undermounted version for like $150, $200. You can get a pretty good, solid, brand new vice that bolts on to the bottom of a decent thickness bench top, and you have yourself a front vice. Like Irwin still make them, I think, and they got a dog on the front jaw as well, pop-up dog. So then you can use it as a tail vice, working away from yourself.
I would use that a lot more. I've got dogs on my vice, and I would use it to clamp onto a tabletop as opposed to clamping something vertically. The vice is how I would usually work, Robin.
Okay, that seems like a really good middle ground, because whenever you, with all the research I've done, whenever you watch these videos, people put in a leg vice and it is the best thing, and they could never go back to something else. And then someone puts in a face vice and they cannot understand why a leg vice is so stupid. You know, it seems like it's really polarized. You're either in this camp or the other camp. But
because people spent money on that stuff, and then now they're invested on it.
I can't see the massive benefit in the leg vice. I appreciate, as you said, it's simple to make, very fiddly with the wedge down at the bottom, like Jay Bates does it. But the face vice is, it just seems so much more straightforward.
I love my twin screw vice because it's got 2 screws, and that part between the 2 is like maximum kind of squishing pressure. And it's mainly when I'm doing making drawers and doing hand cut dovetails on drawers, those pieces just fit perfectly between the screws, and it's like half a turn, bam, that's popped in there. I can do the cut, half a turn, take it out, turn it over, and it's really nice. I like that. My experience with other vices is that they can rack, and I've got a couple of other cheaper vices, front vices from Carbotech. And as soon as you start clamping some pressure onto it, the whole jaw starts racking, and you get dents in your work, and it's just a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So my advice is to spend a bit more on a vice.
That's good advice.
Your vices, Joey, are they quick release or not?
I've had one in the past. When I grew up, my dad had a quick release, and I loved it. And I never been able to find the same thing.
Right. Okay.
But I would love a quick release undermount, steel front with wooden jaws. You know what I mean? And that'd be really nice.
All right, so I guess we'll leave the workbench there then. I'm probably going to be looking into this over the next couple of weeks. I really want to spend a bit of time on it and make sure I make the right thing. But I guess, Bryan, I got to keep in mind what you're saying, that it is just a workbench. So don't be too precious about it.
In 2 years' time, it will not look anything like it does when you finish.
Yeah. So earlier this week, there was a bit of a, and I guess this is a bit of a YouTube news segment. There was a bit of a controversy going on online between 2 makers, and I'm not going to put names in, because if you know the story, you know who they are. But I think what's really interesting is what the confrontation between the two of them was all about. So in Camp A, we have someone who's released a video with a workbench. And this is where it all came about. When I was researching workbenches, it was a specific style of workbench that someone many years ago sold plans for. And it was a specific style. This person sold plans, and just recently this maker has made this bench and released free plans to his workbench. And he hasn't necessarily credited that original bench designer properly.
At the time, he didn't, anyway.
At the time, he didn't, correct, yeah.
Right.
Then, second maker comes along, leaves a comment on the video, and basically calls him out and says, look, A, that original designer is getting no props for this, let alone any income from his plans that he sells on his website. You've just completely undercut him, and you haven't even mentioned him properly, so people would be interested in the original design. Turned into a big hoo-ha, kind of blew up. Both parties have come together and sorted things out, reconciled, which is cool. It's great, because I think the whole drama industry is, while it brings in eyeballs, it's for the wrong reason. Now, the reason I'm interested in this is last week, well, in the last show, we were talking, I can't remember exactly what it was about, but we were talking about in the architectural industry, Bryan, you were saying plagiarism is a big issue. And we were also talking about using other people's designs when we build. So I guess it's just interesting to think about where copying stops and where influence starts. And in particular, when you are putting out content, when I'm putting out videos, I am terrified of stealing other people's work. So do you, when you use someone else's idea, whether it be on YouTube, when you're making a table and putting it on Instagram, do you need to credit someone every time? Joey, go.
The couple of times I have straight up stolen someone's idea, I just said this is this person's idea and I'm having a go because I really like it. I think we're always influenced by things we see, and sometimes, and it happened to me, I had the exact same idea as someone on the other side of the planet, and no idea they existed, and we designed the exact same thing, and I got called out for that, and I said that wasn't my fault, I just never heard of you. And that just happens. But so from that point of view, I think there's absolutely a chance that 1, 2, or 10 people could invent exactly the same thing and all release their videos on the same day, and everyone would go, oh my god. You know, I think it's possible. And there's also definitely people who are just stealing other people's ideas to make money off it. And that, I think, is the intent, is the problem. I think if you're a maker who's experimenting with making furniture and wanting to try out other shapes and forms, I don't see any problem, and me personally would take that as a compliment until they start doing it with the intent of making money from that design without putting any thought into it themselves. And at that point, I would start saying, well, you're making lots of money from my design. So
even if they credited it properly, then it's okay. Are you saying then it's okay?
I don't know. There's a whole different area if it turns into a business for someone. It's in the same breath, I might not have been the first person to invent it anyway. So like all design, I think, has been designed to a certain degree, and it's a matter of which part we're talking about and how it's put together. Bryan probably has different ideas there, but
yeah, I don't know. There are so many facets to this conversation. There's like the YouTube scene that I'm not necessarily as involved in as you guys, and the crediting of work, where I think a lot of it is just repeating what other people have done anyway. And in terms of a workbench build or something, you might be taking different bits of inspiration from different makers. You probably should be crediting people, but then I think if you're giving away the plants for free and you're not making money out of it, it's very hard to say. But the side of things that I would be more concerned of is intellectual protection. Like the kind of, in Australia, we have none. Like we have Jack. So at the minute there is a not-for-profit called the Australian Design Alliance who are trying to lobby state government federal government to offer copyright protections to furniture makers, the same that would apply to artists. Because
does that not apply?
No,
I was going to say, could you also just elaborate on what that is? What is intellectual property?
Intellectual property is when you design, like when you write a piece of music. You know, the main example is, you know, the Verve Bittersweet Symphony. Richard Ashcroft received, I think, less than £1,000, and the Rolling Stones got X many tens of millions for a sample that he didn't credit properly. And like that's a pretty painful experience for somebody to go through, where it's such a small sample, but by not paying the rights up front, where he maybe could have got it for 15-20% royalties, he's lost everything, and he has to keep singing that song and keep losing money on it. Whereas furniture makers in Australia, it happens so many times now. There was an incident, I think last year in Melbourne, where a maker had made, there was a fairly basic tile rack, but there was an element to the design that was unique. And Aldi supermarket used it to style a shoot of tiles for a catalogue. And then the next year's catalogue, they're selling tile rails, which are identical to her tile rails.
Wow.
So they used it, as in they purchased the product from
They would have purchased one. It would have been a stylist resourcing, doing the resourcing, purchasing one, use it for the shoot. And then that photo has gone to Aldi headquarters, and they've obviously had it quoted by a factory in Far East Asia, I would assume, and they're just knocking them off next year. And it happens all the time. It happens.
That's what I was talking about. With, you know, as soon as it turns from someone just ripping you off and turning your idea into a business of their own outright.
Yep.
Even with all due credit, that's not being compensated for your design. That's just them. That's a cop out saying, "Oh yeah, this was designed by this person." Unless they're getting paid for that, and that company Aldi is going to make. How many did they make? 20,000 of them probably, and they're making big money on that. That's the point where that is straight up theft.
Yeah. Like the versions that I've gone through, I think I've spoken about it before, maybe when I was a guest on your show, was I had basically my entire brand knocked off by a business in India.
That's right.
So there was a trade show, and an Australian architect was in Delhi at the time, went along to the trade show, had been following me on Instagram, saw my stuff, and he's like, "Oh, brilliant, Sawdust Bureau, we're here." And then he noticed that I wasn't there, and it wasn't my stuff, and it had knocked off 3 pieces of my stuff. My sketches were blown up on the walls, my brand was there, and it was just masquerading as me. And that's one way, and that's obviously fairly cut and dry.
Your actual brand, they didn't create a new.
No.
It was just Sawdust Bureau India.
Yep.
Wow.
And, my hand is
so blatant.
Photographs of my hand sketching. You know, the pinch bench are up on the wall and on their Instagram account. So, so that's one side of the copying debate, which is cut and dry. You know, they're a commercial company. They've just gone online, seen images, knocked them off, and they're making a profit out of it. The other side would be, I get contacted quite often by students, sort of year 11, year 12 students doing woodworking projects. They'll see stuff on my website and they'll want to send stuff to me to show me that they've built a project that is similar to mine, which is great. You know, they're not trying to make money out of it. They've used you as a start point, like a springboard, and they've added their own things to it, and that is totally fine. I have no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah.
The thing that I was
encourage. You can encourage the young people by allowing them to even just straight up copying. Like if a school kid came to me and said, "I want to copy the table you just made," I said, "Go for it."
Yeah, go for it.
And here's maybe some advice, which I did some stuff wrong, and maybe here's how to do it better.
Yep.
See if you can do it better than me. Go for it.
But what I was talking about last week about me being called out on plagiarism. So I have done a series of pieces using brass dot inlay.
Right.
And I had seen the technique done on YouTube, and it was an old video. It was like I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years into YouTube, so it was poorly filmed.
Right.
It was, I think, how to make a birthday sign or something like that, inlaid into a bit of burl timber and all these dots spelling out a name or a number or something like that. And I was like, that's quite a good idea. So I took the technique and I put it into a piece that I did with an Indigenous artist, putting dot work, their dot art, into a tabletop in different sizes of brass rod. And it was a Dreamtime story about the stars. The artist's agent then commissioned me to do a piece for a boardroom table with an actual star map. Mm-hmm. So he wanted this star map over this huge boardroom table, and I was like, yeah, I can do that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I did that, and then I got approached to do a piece for Studio Review Furniture last year. And I was thinking, moon landing, 50th anniversary is coming up. And I wanted to sort of look at Australia's involvement with that. So it was all to do with parks being the broadcasting. I'm sure you guys have seen the movie The Dish.
Yeah.
So rather than just doing a generic star map, I did a historical and geographical trace of the star map to what it looked like at parks the moment man landed on the moon.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And the second that Wood Review were the main sponsors of the article, the second that photo appeared on Instagram, somebody commented, and it's a maker in America that does star map tables.
Uh-huh.
And this is pretty much the bulk of his work is brass inlaid tables, whereas for me, I have 3 pieces that are brass inlaid tables. And it was a direct call out of plagiarism. And I was like, my table looks absolutely nothing like his whatsoever. Like
Just
the
the
design
technique.
of it, it's a technique. It's like saying, if you're doing shushugiban, like, would the first person that realized that you'd burn timber, the first person that did dovetails, the first person that did spleen joints, like, I think it is perfectly fine to take elements of that and put it into your design, so long as your design is different. That to me is not plagiarism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I make a squeeze bench, which is slightly, shorter than yours and maybe a little more stout, and I call it a squeeze bench, and then that's too far. But as you say, like, who was the first person to do a river table?
Yeah, totally. Well, that's another argument. I think he
That fellow, whatever his name is.
I think he registered the patent.
Yeah, it's
and
now
nobody else could
copyright.
call it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you
so
can't
people
call it a
can't
river
call it
table. People are calling them canyon tables and all sorts of things, creek tables and whatever you want to call it.
Anything that can be done to put people off creating a river table is great in my book. So yeah,
Absolutely.
you can't call it a river table, and that's awesome.
Too much epoxy.
All right, we talked about this last season with Jordan, because I remember he put out a video with a design of a table, and then I think it was many years later, another very popular YouTuber put out a new video of a similar style, and then all of a sudden Jordan, on his original video, started getting called out that he had copied this new, even though the videos were 2 years apart. He kept getting these comments about copying it. So
you can't do anything about that. I mean,
and that's where particularly in the YouTube world, the crediting becomes very grey, because I guess, as you say, Brian, we don't have any real cut and dry black and white. This is what copying is, and this is what isn't. But I find it really hard to swallow the idea that I need to credit someone if I put out a video of something that I've made on YouTube. Obviously from an ethical perspective, I will do it because I think ethically that's right. But there's no legal or actual ramifications if I just steal someone's design and put out a video of how I made it. I'm not going to get a knock on the door and someone's going to come tell me I need to pay up. It just doesn't happen in the YouTube world.
I think it depends. It depends a bit on your intent. Again, I was just thinking about. I could make one of Brian's pinch benches, and I think it would be interesting for me to try and make his bench and make it in a completely different way, but end up with a similar result.
Yep.
And that would just be a fun exercise, I think. And I think most woodworkers would probably go, oh, look, this is a pretty cool thing. This guy is trying to copy but make it in a different way. And just from a technical woodworking point of view, you would say it would be an interesting kind of process to say, how would I go about this in a different way, get the same result? Cool thing. Now, but if I made that video and didn't elaborate on the fact that I was making it differently, I just made the video and said, look, I've copied it, and I'm going to call it Squeeze Bench, then Bryan has got a good cause to jump up and down a bit and say, hey, you just stole my idea. But I think there's different intents. If your intent is bad, then it's bad. If your intent is good, then it's probably good.
But is it your responsibility to credit that? Because, as we've seen, you might be creating something that someone's already created, and then you've accidentally copied someone. So,
well, then I don't buy the fact that, say, in my case, was a little glass coffee table, and the guy and I had never seen it, never heard of this guy, and I came up with the same design in a different way, but it ended up with exactly the same design. Now, he had his out for at least a year before me. It doesn't mean that he was the first. It was just different, and so I don't have to credit him because I didn't know about it, and I didn't push the subject. I just explained in my video that I never heard from you, and here's how I got to that design. It's quite a different way from the way he got to his design, and it's just a different way. I thought it was interesting that we got to the same thing in different ways, just like I was talking about before. So I don't think, in that sense, if you're completely ignorant about the other one existing, there can be no. I can't see how anyone can have an issue with that. The two people themselves may want to have a discussion about it. I'm not sure, but to the rest of the world, I don't think they've got an opinion.
yeah. I put out a video probably about a year ago where I inset a wireless charger into a bedside table. Right? You probably remember that one, Joe.
Yeah.
And it worked well. It was a really cool idea. Blew up on internet, on Reddit, did averagely on YouTube. Months, probably a couple weeks to a month later, everyone, all the big guys, suddenly started doing wireless chargers. Yeah. And I've only ever done this. It's only ever happened to me once, where I feel like I was the one that set that trend in motion because it did so well on Reddit. All of those guys would have seen it from my video. By no means was I the first, because there were more before me, but I do feel like, and obviously I could be wrong, but I'm pretty confident that my video was the one that got those guys doing this.
Yeah.
I would not feel right jumping up and down and complaining about that at them or to them, because they got the idea from me, and there was zero crediting. No one like even said we got the idea from a fellow YouTuber. No one said anything. In that situation, I don't feel like I've got any grounds. And I'd feel like an arsehole if I suddenly went, actually, you can't, you got to mention,
It's interesting. That one particularly is a little bit interesting because it starts to get into, because I know IKEA picked it up and they have incorporated it into their bedside tables, or some versions of bedside tables. And so at some point it goes from someone's kind of bright idea, but it becomes almost into public realm, it's just normal, it's just the same as discussing which kind of joinery, you can't patent dovetail joinery because it's just accepted that it's a thing and everyone uses it, the Egyptians used it. So at some point technology is going to be incorporated into furniture, and then you did it and it popped up into a bunch of people's faces who gave them ideas, and probably people were already thinking about doing it anyway, somehow incorporating technology into furniture, and it's just something that just suddenly happened, and I don't think you could probably ever pinpoint the first anyway.
It's definitely it's an unusual thing in furniture design, because other industries you would have some level of protection, but we don't currently have it. In architecture, the issue that I had was the firm that I was working for did a residential house that was one of the director's houses, beautiful house, and it was called the Kensington Lighthouse. So it didn't look like a lighthouse, but it was sort of metaphorically like a lighthouse. It was taller than the buildings around it. It had damp balloon, which is sort of a semi-translucent cladding in the front. So it sort of lit up at night, and it looked like a beacon. And it was posted on DZine, which for a small architecture firm in Australia was a great way to get publicity. Instantly, somebody went on and called it out. They said, "Nah, this has been done before. This has been done in England," and it was another project called Lighthouse, which was of a similar shape, similar form. And then the designers of that and everybody started going on DZine and just hammering the company that I worked for.
Wow.
So then we had to go back and try to trace the history of their design and the history of our design, just as a level of defense. Like, we weren't calling them out, but as a level of defense. And we had submitted ours for planning a year before their design was made public. So it's like, you can come up with fairly similar ideas on the other side of the world, but just be very, very careful about calling people out on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems odd.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you might end up being the one with the egg on your face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, in terms of the original kerfuffle between these two makers, they've come together and I think they've sorted things out, which is really awesome. But I think this is going to, because it was between two such high profile makers, this is really going to change the way crediting is done on YouTube videos going forward. People are going to be a little bit more mindful and maybe cautious going forward, because this has caused such a stink.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. All right, so we're coming up to time, but before we do that, Joey, you've had another interesting client pop up.
Well, I had a couple of issues. I emailed you guys earlier about how terrible of a week I was having.
Yeah.
So last episode we talked briefly about knock-on effects and how that can affect us getting paid and just the whole job. And so what happened was my last video was the Remu vanities, veneered vanities that sitting on some steel brackets in a bathroom. Yep. Now, for that same house, I actually made two smaller ones, and they were downstairs in a little toilet room, so only about 1 meter wide. So originally that room was going to be tiled, and so I had made my two Remu slabs just big enough that I would need to trim them a bit once the tiles went in, just so, because who knows how thick the tiles will be and all the rest. Now, I should explain that these vanities were sitting in a three-sided alcove, so they had to sit between two walls. Mm-hmm. So I called the owner at some point and said, "How are we going? Are the tiles in?" And she said, "Oh no, there's no tiles. We're putting wallpaper in there." And I said, "Well, that wasn't the plan." And she goes, No, that's always been the plan. It's never going to be tiles. It's always going to be wallpaper." And I said, "Okay, I'm pretty sure that's not the truth, but in which case I'm going to have to check your vanities may be too short, because I wouldn't have allowed to go make them long enough to go all the way to the jib board. I've allowed like 20 mil shorter to go between the tiles, and with a little bit of trimming." And she just went dead silent on me at that point. So what ended up happening was, through a series, she didn't talk to me. I had to talk to the builder. She wouldn't talk to him even half the time. What happened was the wallpaper went on. I got a final measurement, and it turned out that the length I had trimmed them was just acceptable. Like, there was going to be a gap, but we could fill it with some black silicone, which we were going to have to silicone these on anyway. So the vanities were slightly short, but within the tolerance, just that we could kind of fudge it. The problem is that she went and put wallpaper on the walls, and she wanted black silicone, so I had to mask off the wallpaper and on my vanities.
What colour was the wallpaper?
Like a dark grey and silver with like a pattern and like a embossed pattern on it. So it was like really
Didn't
complex.
just change the silicon to match the wall, or did she want the black?
No, it had to be black. It couldn't be any other color. Like, I mean, if it was white, it would look terrible. So it was. The problem is that masking onto wallpaper is not a cool idea, especially brand new wallpaper.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was like, kind of, stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do I put the masking tape on the wallpaper, or what do you do? So I said, right, I'm going to have to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be a terrible, messy line of silicon. Anyway, did it. The last 20 mils of masking tape pulled off a 20 mil piece of wallpaper.
Oh,
So,
no.
Like, I couldn't believe it. I got all the way around this meter and plus the width of it, and this brand new house just about finished, and there's this big blurring white chunk of, you couldn't ask for, and like, this is just a direct knock-on result of the client changing her mind and lying about it and putting wallpaper. And if someone had told me they were putting wallpaper against a vanity, I would have said, "Are you really? Are you asking for trouble? Like, it's not. You're going to have to put a row of tiles or something there, because you're going to get water damage straight away." Anyway, so then she went silent on me. I told the builder, I said, "Look, this has happened. I think it can be patched because of where it was. You could probably fix this up, but it's part of the course. What am I meant to do?" And then he was like, "Oh, that sucks for you, but thank God you've told me, because we were going to have to do some touch-up painting on the skirting, and I wondered if we should mask the wallpaper off." And then he's saying, "No, I won't do that. I'll come up with another solution." So the end result was that she said, "I'm not paying you because she's not going to pay me the final invoice because we have to fix up the wallpaper." She was talking about re-wallpapering the whole room, and she just sent me the bill for the wallpapering, which was actually only $100. He somehow, I don't know how, he managed to replace the whole piece. Wow. I think what he did is cut the wallpaper along the silicon line and then just put a new piece on, and so the silicon is now not doing anything, but it is what it is. That's his problem. And so she's deducting that money from the final invoice, and I imagine she should be paying me right now. So that was one of them, and I was just like, so the whole thing, I was just like, this is so stupid. Like, this is not my fault. It shouldn't be my fault to have to deal with the fact that I have to suddenly come up with a plan to work out how to seal this vanity onto paper and do a nice clean job. Like, I would not have been okay with this if I had known. And an interesting thing. So the net result of all this, plus this whole other issue, which I won't get into because it's about a 20-minute story, but the end result was I had to deal with my lawyers with a client because the wife was happy with all the work we did. 3 weeks later, husband was completely furious at me for the work we did, and so I went to my lawyer. He said, "No, you have a legal right to assume that the wife can make decisions, and she made decisions on what we did. And so, if he wants to take you to court, he can take you to court for it." I'm expecting him to do that. I will see what happens.
Oh, jeez.
And anyway, the upside of all that is that I've gone and I've drawn up now, instead of having like one line of terms and conditions, I now have like this many terms and conditions, which is a full page I'm showing the guys. And so the biggest problem with getting people to sign quotes is getting them to actually sign it. They've got to print it out, sign it, scan it, find a file or whatever, and get it back to you. And it's a pain in the ass. Like, we've all had to do it. And so I actually found an Australian company called DocuSign. Yep. And do you guys know about them?
Yep.
That's the best thing since sliced bread. So now everything is going through these guys, and what it is I can drag on my PDF quote onto their software. I can add some check marks. I can add a box where they need to push a signature, and they can okay different variations or whatever.
Yeah.
It gets emailed to the client, and they push the button saying they accept, digitally sign it, and it comes straight back to me. And it's like 2 or 3 clicks, and they've signed a contract, and it makes life so much easier. So that is now my new favorite thing to save my butt.
Do they charge a fee to use the service?
For their lowest package is 25 a month, 25 Australian a month.
No, that's not too bad.
Which is not too bad, and that gives you 5 quotes or 5 documents a month. And that's enough for me at this stage. So I think that will make life a lot easier.
I've just got into I don't think I told you guys, the build upstairs is going ahead. We've locked it in for the 2nd of December. So
cool.
Yeah, that's all underway. Engineers signed off. The whole quoting process has been done electronically. The builder basically sent me a document to electronically sign to say that I'm okay with electronic signatures.
Okay, right.
And then it takes you to this like portal that it's got all of your different individual payments, when they're going to be, and then that's it. Everything comes through email. You sign everything electronically.
Yeah,
and
that's the only way, man.
Not a single piece of paper has been used. It's amazing.
Yeah. What? Because I couldn't believe how simple it was when I found it. This is like my dream piece of software, and it's going to save a lot of hassle. Because what it means is every time one of my clauses in my new terms are that every change that the client makes will now be written on. I would send them a new quote and cross out the old, whatever it was, write in the new thing, and they just have to click on the approval button.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that that's what's happening. It makes life super easy.
Yeah.
I'm sick of people just lying to me, and it's just not cool. So
Yeah, well, maybe next week we'll get into the full length of that story, because I'm quite interested here, because it sounds like it got a bit heated. But we'll leave it there for today. So to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please go ahead and give it a rating on iTunes. That really does help us out. The Shop Stool Podcast is available on iTunes and most other podcast apps, as well as YouTube. My name is Robin Lewis. Joey and Brian, thanks very much for hanging out today. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you in the next show.
see you, everyone.
See ya, bye.